welcome to our TAP Nugget Power Hour. So I'm Dr. Goins. I'm the Resilient Teacher Mom, the creator of relationship-based classroom management, and the author of the book, When Relationships Matter, Social Emotional Approach to Teaching and Learning. I wanted to, put some video content out in the atmosphere, what it's really like to be a relationship-based classroom manager or an educator in the space. I tested my research and practices by opening Heartwise Scholars Microschool this fall for my 5 children and 4 other friends, and we're, in preparations to expand to multiple locations. I've already had an application in for a while for a location, and I'm just, going through all the steps to get the permitting that is allowed for the city to recognize and allow me to operate. But we are also working on an additional location so that we can expand enrollment for our K-5. With the operations of our microschool and kind of practicing the research in this approach in the educational space, in the alternative educational space, but already knowing that it worked really well in the public school space, and most of my scholars come from private school backgrounds, I'm like on fire to share this approach. But I've already trained off of social emotional learning, restorative practices, and aspects of my approach before publishing my research this spring, and I have come to conclusions that there are many people interested, many educators, counselors, school leaders interested and have good intentions around building relationships with students and parents, but really don't have the right mindsets and the right motives behind why they want to engage in this practice. And really, if you're gonna be a relationship-based educator, and I mean purely the gift and the incentive is being in a healthy relationship with another individual, there's a lot that you have to give into that is very countercultural to classroom management, strategies and approaches we were taught, even I was taught in teaching programs, but also countercultural to how other relationships in other spaces are formed. And so when I wrote this book, there is after the preface, a little section called relationship status. And your new relationship status. And throughout my whole book, I talk about a lot of references of learning, how to be in a committed relationship to students, because whether you like it or not, when that child is on your roster, you're contracted to be in relation with them 180 days, but you know how the teacher gig works, sometimes your teacher-student relationships last a lifetime. And so when you're in a committed relationship where you're going to have conflict and friction and there are going to be hard and challenging times, it's important that you understand why you're in the relationship and the type of status that you are in a relationship. And I talk a lot in this chapter about how I thought I was a relationship-based person. I'll even read it myself. It says, until I got married, I can honestly confess that I didn't understand how relationships worked. I thought I did because I had plenty of them growing up. However, the range of intimacy and value with each one varied completely by how much of myself I was willing to give. For a select few of my best friends, including my husband, I was willing to give more time, money, and even resources to make it work. For other people, I was only willing to connect on a surface level. So that sounds pretty deep, but honestly, when I give PDs to teachers about relationship-based practices, and it's like pins and needle in the room because everybody's listening, the hard part sometimes I don't get to, impact, but need to impact, is that if you don't have a relationship where you are willing to give time, money, and even resources to make it work, then you are literally connecting at a surface level. And then I continue on. As I grew up in my faith and was newly married, I started to understand more about my social emotional DNA. To me, that meant I was growing more social, more aware, and how I acted and reacted emotionally in social situations. The final conclusion was that I was a highly sensitive, vulnerable person. It was difficult for me to trust other people because I had been hurt by many people in my past. I never dealt with it or acknowledged it. I always kept myself busy enough to move on. If I wanted to grow in a real relationship with another person, it became increasingly obvious that I would have to deal with some of my past issues and figure out what triggered my strong emotions. Pretty hurtful, huh? But that's how deep it was for me to commit to being in a relationship. It literally took me like a deep dive about self. Like there are things when being in a relationship with my husband and then encountering that really difficult child that triggered me socially and emotionally into places that I did not know how to handle. I found myself, kind of insecure about certain things, still harboring some past hurts. And then those triggers happen because I fully haven't dealt with some things. And so when I find sometimes in the relationship building work, teachers go into it as if like it's this cute team building activity they do like maybe the first or 2 weeks of school, and it's like this really like fun and fluffy like door or bulletin board display, but it's not. Like a real relationship takes time. A real relationship means that you personally might be triggered socially and emotionally in ways you may have never encountered, but to have empathy because they are too. And so when you recognize that that is at play, things change in your mind and heart. And then we move on. So there are a couple knowings I highlight more in this section of my book, but some things that came up for me, as nice as I can be, I realized I had an anger problem and I had a quick temper, and that a lot of my past issues with dealing with people came from me constantly feeling like an outsider. I also talked about I was very ambitious, but the motives behind my ambitions was just because I was really focused on being that high achiever, almost a perfectionist with things. And so I wanted to keep the reputation, and I had certain things in my bucket list or things I wanted to check off on my list to do. And so I would be ambitious at any cost. And so sometimes I wouldn't respect relationships I had along the way if it came between me and my ambition. The third thing I talked about as I reflected on my relationship status is like the morals and values I give into. I always thought that, every human being gave into morals and values for the common good of all mankind. But really, that stops a lot of the time when you have a lot of pride. So I realized how I was very prideful. I said in here, I'd always been a rule follower, a lover of justice, a highly moral person. Eventually, it turned into pride. I was out to prove what is good and right, and I was quick to talk instead of listen. I was quick to react in judgment rather than empathy. I was a good person, but I had a selfish heart. If my ways, thoughts, and actions were the only things I valued in my mind and heart, was there room for anyone else? The answer is simply no. You can't love others that way, so I had to learn how to listen, pray, and encourage others, even when I didn't fully understand the circumstances. And so that one was a big part for me because I thought I was always right as a teacher. I thought my way was always fair. I thought it was the kid that had the problem or the parent that had the problem. But then sometimes I, with my pride, wasn't open to truly understand the situation and wasn't open to be empathetic. I was very apathetic because it just wasn't my way. And so now that I've had that process where I've, dug deep about some things about myself, I said in my book, now I'm a healthier version of myself, ready and willing to invest in deeper relationships with others, especially in the classroom. So then I open into just the fundamentals of my PERT system. So I am doing this Nugget Power Hour just to show and illustrate to you that my journey as a relationship-based classroom manager really was a huge part of me being on a self-discovery journey. And so taking over that classroom where I made the approach, I was entering in as a third grade teacher when I just married my husband and he had moved me to a different state. And I had tried to get a teaching job, but at that time, there were massive teacher cuts across the nation. It was the big recession. And so there were no teacher jobs. And so by the time my Virginia license transferred to a South Carolina license, it was mid-year and there was only one job in town. And it was a third grade class that had been left in third, second, first grade, and kindergarten. And so I was coming from 3 years of teaching kindergarten in Virginia. So the job was a third grade classroom, which in itself scared me because that is an SOL grade, a testing grade. But I was waitressing at a local Thai restaurant, and I vividly remember crying because I remember, working 2 lunch shifts and they stiffed me with no tip. So going from, a place I called home for my whole life to a new marriage, a new town, no friends, and no job, it was a low part of my life. And so I came up with the acronym PART because in my transition to the job, I was allowed 2 days of shadowing. And one day was just to observe the class. And I noticed the things that they needed to learn in the classroom. And so I made up the acronym that they needed to be prepped and ready, to be organized, to know how to be ready for learning, and attitude awareness, because there were a lot of interpersonal problems that had to do with just, personal talk and just poor attitudes. Verbally and physically, you can tell the body language was just poor. And then attitude awareness was A. And then respect and responsibility, just because that's how I was raised in my family, that our relationships with each other are respectful and responsible. And the last one was teamwork, because there was so much animosity within that community that nobody got along. So I made the acronym PART and told them that, we're going to partner together for teaching and learning, not knowing that it was going to blossom into this whole system and approach, and, kind of put a little seed of me in research. But even in that year, I knew that's what I wanted to get into. And I think strategically, it was what I was also feeling what I wanted to give into at home, because I was a newlywed. I had just gotten married and my husband had just moved into town for residency. So discovering myself as a relational being was important for me personally in my marriage, but professionally in the classroom. And so that's where this journey began. So, fast forward, I, taught at that school in third grade and didn't want to return because it wasn't that, great of a year. But the only job offered to me was back at the school in second grade. So I took the second grade job. And then I got moved back to my favorite grade level, which is kindergarten. So I taught 3 years in South Carolina. And by the time I taught in South Carolina for 3 years, I, was a dance crew. I started a dance crew with the kids that I was in relationship with in third grade. I started a dance crew for them. For third, fourth, and fifth graders. And at that school, I was the reading teacher of the year by the time I left. And for the district, I was a Rotary teacher of the year by the time I left for service over self. I took some time off relationally because personally, me and my husband really desired to start a family, but it wasn't happening for 2 years. So, we didn't have a baby. So when my husband got a real job, we moved back to Virginia, where our family was, again, relationally has an impact on you. We wanted to be close to family. So we moved back home and we took some time off and we engaged in ministry. So my husband and I were Young Life leaders for 5.5 years, and we had just recommitted to serving again in Young Life this year with our 5 kids. But Young Life and doing relationships with teens for 5.5 years is really what kind of solidified that when I returned in the classroom 2016, that as a new mom of 2 kids and a Young Life leader, that I knew from jump in my first grade job in 2016 that I was going to only manage in a way that respects the relationship and doesn't hurt it. And that's where my journey began. So from that first grade classroom, I taught kindergarten and kindergarten again and collected 3 years of data. And then with 3 years of data, I realized that I was academically making growth that I couldn't even touch when I was single and had it put together as a classroom teacher. And it was about every child in the room made at least a year's growth in reading and math, or 2 years growth in reading. And a lot of it had to do with the relationship-based approach. So that's what got me into my doctoral program. That is what got me, kind of focusing on the research, and that's what got me to open this school. But the first thing most people get wrong if you want to be a relationship-based educator is you bypass self. Even if I'm not careful as an entrepreneur, I will manage, a column just for Heartwise Scholars and all the tasks I need to get done for there. And I will manage just a column for Teachers as Partners and all the tasks I need to get done for there. And I'll just manage a column just for Home and Family and all the tasks that need to be managed for there, and never set a column for myself. That is the biggest mistake you can ever do in terms of respecting a relationship. Because if you cannot take care of yourself, if you do not know yourself, then how can you share yourself with somebody else? So it's important, if this is a work that you're interested in, that you are willing to kind of reassess and dissect yourself. And there are 3 areas that you need to grow in to kind of start this journey with yourself and potentially your students. So the first area is self-efficacy. You've got to really dissect and study your motives behind, your beliefs and what you do. And so self-efficacy is your personal beliefs and your capabilities and abilities to achieve a goal. And so that in itself is really important in terms of classroom management, because there's a certain test that I can give you where you can assess for yourself where you are in that journey. And it's okay to start wherever you're at, but it's important to know where you're at and be aware of where your start is. The next area of self that you have to be aware of is self-awareness. So that whole chapter in this book, My New Relationship Status, is really just self-awareness. I haven't even touched managing any of those things that I became more aware about. It's just I was more honest with myself. And now that that was in the atmosphere and I'm willing to admit and confess it, then we can move forward. But if you're not willing to recognize and be aware of where you're at and where your heart is for things, what triggers your emotions, we're not going to get anywhere. So you can go to as many PDs and trainings about building relationships and blame it on the trainings and the approaches. But honestly, without self-awareness, there's no next step. Then after self-awareness and you know what you're dealing with, you know what triggers you, you won't have to feel stuck anymore, because then that's when you can strategically start making some self-management plans. And just know that, I find in the classroom, self-management is where most people falter. They don't have the systems of support in place just, to protect them in the work. It's almost as if they're planning to burn out and they're just buying time. And that is not healthy for any individual, professional out there working, but especially for a teacher, because this is not a profession where, we're in it for money. We're in it for service. And usually the ones who want to be teachers have a divine calling on their life, to bring our community for good. So we need you. And so self-management is really important, because once we become more self-aware what your triggers are, and more self-aware about little things like, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Where is your place where you feel productive? What type of learning environment kind of works with that productivity? And then where do you find rest? And what rhythms of rest are you getting in your work week or your work month? All of that stuff is awareness. And then managing accordingly will help you keep up with the work and make you sustainable in terms of retaining your work and purpose in the classroom. So that's my Nugget Power Hour for you today and this week. It's just most people don't value themselves, so they don't count themselves in the mix. But for me, being a relationship-based classroom manager and educator, I have a very strong sense of self. And the more I strengthen my sense of self and my relationship with myself, and acknowledge my value, and, work with my strengths, and collaborate and work with others who are in my areas of weakness, I am more than happy to manage this work. Like, I'm actually, thrilled and, joyful in being here. And so I really want that in most educators' lives, in all educators' lives. I say most because I know not everybody believes in this type of approach, but it is possible, and it brings, just freedom and joy, and just knowing that it is truly just a relationship that is the gift. So that's my Nugget Power Hour for this week. Thank you for listening and tuning in, and just follow along. Next week, I'll have some other reflections for you. Have a good day. Bye.